The Tile Roofing Industry Alliance presents changes to the 6th edition High Wind Tile Installation Manual issued in 2020, the High Wind Updates. The first new addition is the Roof Design Product Flowchart, essentially a roadmap of how to do the uplift calculations for both underlayment design and tile design. For the underlayment design, use the exposure category, mean roof height, and basic wind speed to find the required design pressure for the underlayment system on Table 1A. If you're using a 2-ply hot mop system, then you can use Table 1 to find an anchor sheet nailing pattern with a value that meets or exceeds the required design pressure from Table 1A. If using any other underlayment system, use a system that has an allowable design pressure listed in its product approval that meets or exceeds the design pressure determined in Table 1A. Here we see Table 1A. We first look at the roof exposure, B, C, or D, then find the mean roof height to find the right row, and then the wind speed in the column to find the design pressure in pounds per square foot. There's two tables for gable roofs and for hip roofs. Let's take a look at the tile design. First, you need to identify the proper Table 2. There are 6 different ones, and each one has a letter, 2 letters actually, after the number 2. The first letter is either a G or H, that stands for gable or hip roof. The second letter is a B, C, or D, which stands for the exposure category. So let's say, for example, you had a hip roof and exposure B, you would then use Table 2HB. Once you've identified the correct table, look up the roof slope, the roof height, and the wind speed to find the values on the table. Those are your overturning moments, and you'll find 2 values, one for LPZ, one for HPZ. And these stand for low pressure zones and high pressure zones. TRI took the many different roof zones listed in the for each roof type and simplified it into 2 categories of a low pressure zone and high pressure zone. Once you found these values, then you can reference Table 3 for the mechanical resistance values for the different fastening methods to find mechanical fastening methods that meets or exceeds these values, or refer to a tile adhesives product approval if you're going to use one of those adhesives. While the 5th edition manual had 2 tables for tiles overturning moments, the new 6th edition has 6 tables. Hip roofs less than 612 have the same or lower pressures. Hip roofs that are 612 and greater have higher values, and all gable roof designs have higher pressures and overturning moments compared to the previous edition. Gable roofs are not as aerodynamic and can act like wings of a plane creating lift, compared to hip roofs that are more aerodynamic, shaped more like a dome and reduce uplift. So looking at the tables and comparing the 5th edition to the 6th edition, we can look at, for slopes below 4.5 and 12, they're actually the same values for hip roofs 6 and 12 and less in exposure B. But at 4.5 and 12 to 6 and 12, they've actually gone down compared to the previous table. And the same is true for exposure C and exposure D. Steeper hip roofs over 612 have higher values in exposure B, exposure C as well, and exposure D. Gable roofs all have higher values in the 6th edition compared to the 5th edition. You can see here for exposure B, gable roofs 612 and less, at less than 4.5 and 12, the values are higher, and they're also higher between 4.5 and 12 and 6 and 12. And so is the same for exposures C and D, where they are higher in the 6th edition than they were in the 5th edition. and same is true for gable roofs over 6 and 12. In exposures B, C, and D, they're also higher values. We now have two options for fastening. The single fastening method is similar to the 5th edition, where one fastening method meets or exceeds the requirements for the entire roof for both the LPZ and HPZ. Now we also have the two fastening methods, where you can use one fastening method for the high pressure zones and a different fastening method for the low pressure zones. To do that, you'll need to calculate the size of the high pressure zones, referred to as dimension A, which is calculated as 10% of the least horizontal dimension or building width, or 0.4 times the mean roof height, whichever is smaller, but not less than either 4% of the least horizontal dimension, the building width, or 3 feet. Once you've determined your design requirements, then you can find a fastening method that meets or exceeds those design requirements. Table 3 provides mechanical fastening resistance values for a range of different fastening methods. And these are the same values that were in the 5th edition manual. Or you can use a roof tile adhesive with a product approval that meets or exceeds the value. If you have any questions, contact the Tile Roofing Industry Alliance at tileroofing.org or one of the tile manufacturers.